Welcome back to Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast for Fleche Wallone women. The recap, the start was insanely early, different to the other races. We've got Roubaix on a different day. This starts at the crack of dawn, just about in Europe, so it actually starts really cold, from what I understand. This is in the Wallonne region, Benji. Am I correct?
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
around Liège.
But it's, what's it called in Dutch? Oh no, that Valchapelle?
Wallsapel, yeah, you're right. Jesus, you're
I'm on
actually getting
fire.
Duolingo level 7 at this point, or?
I'm on a streak of Dutch, obviously. But here we have SD Works have dominated this race with Hannah van der Breggen for like 7 times in a row. She won, but then Cavalli broke the SD Works streak last year. Vollering was their big leader for this steep finish. She's their best Ardennes rider. She just won Amstel Gold, and this is the middle part of the Triple Crown, the Ardennes Triple Crown. But we've got Liana Lippert, who's good here. Riolini in her first edition for Trek Segafredo. I was keen to see how she would go. Moolman, now an AG Insurance, is good on these finishes. Van Vleuten, etc. But the profile, 127 Ks. They do the Murderwee 3 times, the Côte de Cherev twice. So that's 1,500 meters at 7.3%, and it crests 5.5 Ks from the Murderwee, which it is not that long. The two climbs pretty close together, and the Murderwee itself is 1K 11.6%, with a really steep section in the hairpin or the corner at about 500, 600 meters to go. But yeah, Cavalli was someone I was really hoping Benji would be, good in this race after she won last year, but she's just not been the same since the crash, unfortunately.
You're right. That crash last year really hit her, and we've seen her recover now for the last period. And obviously, concussion and so forth included in that has turned into a month-long recovery, a months-long recovery, now half a year-long recovery. And at this point, I just hope that we once again see Marta Cavalli at some point at her prime. Whether that's this year, I don't really care. I'm fine if it's next year. I just want to see her at her prime again in the future, because that hit that she got by Nicole Frayne, which I'm pretty sure that she never really got or relegated or anything for, well, that hindered her career a lot this year. But that being said, they still have Uttrup Ludwig in that team, which on paper for this finish would fit. But the last 2 weeks, I didn't feel like Uttrup Ludwig was really competitive in the races that we were watching. And I guess we'll see today if that's the case. But to be honest, Fleche Wallone starts, and it starts with a breakaway. 4 rides up the road: Anderson, Nealon, Christoforou, and Ella Harris. But this break is going to get caught, you know that? And this brings us to a triple Ludwig instantly, because Ludwig narrowly avoids a traffic sign with roughly 44k to go. This is like before we get to the second last Murderwee and so forth. And some other people actually crash into that sign. It was, X-Rider that crashes into that sign, but still remains upright somehow. Like the sign is completely evaporated, but that rider is still in one piece on the bike, which is shocking. But Uttrup Ludwig, I don't know if she actually went down, but she continued forward from that point. I think Cavalli dropped back at that point. And this is just before we get to the next climb. And the interesting part is, we got a bit of a split in the peloton. And I couldn't tell whether it was from the crash or whether it was from the climb itself that came afterwards. Because Gaia Realini, a rider that would be pretty good for Trek on this terrain, is in the second group. And online sources are telling me, oh, she waited on Dijknen. I don't believe that. There's no bloody way that Gaia Realini is waiting on Dijknen at this point, who was in that second group. I'm pretty sure she was probably just out positioned, maybe because of the crash, right?
Yeah, and also Riolini, while she might not have dropped back for Dijknen, I didn't really see, particularly in the final, a concerted effort from the other Trek teammates to position Gaia Riolini. So she's at a significant weight disadvantage for the majority of the parkour, except the Murderwee. And if she loses a wheel on a false flat downhill and they're pushing it, it's a huge effort for her to come back. That's why she's so talented, because she can, most of the time she does, and in the crosswind she was good in the Middle East, but that's probably what happened. And also, I don't think Trek surrounded her with Van Anrooy or Lisa Longoborghini. I don't think she had clear leadership here. I think it was co-leadership with Elisa Longoborghini. Whether that's right or wrong based on ELB's current form, I would say wrong. But, she's young, that's the hierarchy. But she got some damn big watts per kilo. Anyway, Murderwee with 37 Ks to go. AVV goes early again, Benji. She did this the other day in Amstel, right? With so many Ks left.
Exactly.
What do you think? Why do you think she's doing this? Do you think she knows she's not in the shape where if it comes down to just a head-to-head in the Murder Wii against Following, she's got no chance? Is this to put Lipid in a seat? What's the rationale for this?
I think both of those options are exactly what leads to this, because you're saying Lippert as the rider that is more punchy at the moment. We will fit more for Lippert at the moment than it does for Van Vleuten, especially in the form that they are currently in. And add to that the fact that Van Vleuten might not be overly confident in her abilities to follow a Vollering on the last climb alone, that type of stuff. So I would say that's the reason. I also heard, I think I read from Matt Mitchell on Twitter that Annemiek van Vleuten, in preparation of this race the day before, took a completely flat, shorter recon, while the other riders in the team went on hills and so forth. And he suggested that would be because maybe an early attack would come as a consequence. Now, it really turned out
because she's on her own team. She doesn't know Lippert's on her team yet. What are we, 4 months in?
We'll get to that at the end. But I will say, I do think it's a good strategy. As in, I do think Van Vleuten should go early and Lippert should be used for the last climb. In the same way that in the men's side, last year, Evenepoel should have gone early, while Alaphilippe would be the one for the final climb in Murderhui, and they just used Evenepoel to position Alaphilippe, which I found stupid. Now, I like that Van Vleuten. Yeah.
Well, I think because SD Works, they only got 5 riders here. One's a leader, and no disrespect to them, but the SD Works Classic Cobble Classics juggernaut are a lot harder to put under pressure early. And I think if Reusser drops early on the steep climbs and they've worked with Bredevold and Co. or Neve Fisher Black, then you can have a situation where, like, Neve Fisher Black is chasing an AVV on the flat. And that's a really good situation if you're another team, if you're a Movistar. So, yeah, it makes sense. Trek tried the same thing with Van Anrooy and Spratt. And Spratt got a decent gap, but once again, Benji, SD Works did do a fair bit of the chasing, but then AG kind of started helping as well.
Yep. There were situations where groups got ahead, like we just said it. The Annemiek van Vleuten move was with Nivea Doma and Longoborghini and Molman, and when that happened, it was Reusser and Vollering that solved it. That was on the second last Murderhui. And Reusser, I feel like I see this often. I think we said it in Amstel as well, where Bredewold attacked and then dropped back to pace. Yeah. I feel like Reusser did a bit of an attacking move before she started pacing after this Murderhui, which that attack would never work. Like, the gap is significant enough that she can't just bridge it on her own, even with the best D-tier at the moment activeness at her. Like, she should just pace, and that's what she does, and she gets close, and Vollering takes over, which is often useful, because you mentioned this a lot when teams are pacing to try and get their leader back into the race, that the leader should also try and help a tiny bit to make sure it's actually possible to catch the front group. Whether it's a bit too early to do that here is something that can be questioned, but they catch those riders. And what I like about the next spot is that the other teams don't sit down and just are like, oh, we got caught. Let's just sit down and wait for Murderhui at this point. We see Trek rolling attacks with Van Androoy, with Spratt, and Spratt gets a bit of a gap. There's like a chasing group once again an AG Insurance team rider. Hekier in there, Bauernfeind, rider on Canyon, which is a very solid talent. Last year she came from the Generation team and rolled up podiums in every single race she rode. I think Magnaldi was in that trio as well, who was chasing Spratt. The gap was so significant after a minute 10 towards the peloton group where Vollering was, and Movistar was the one helping then. So to come back to your point of teams helping FD Works, it's kind of logical, I think, at this point in the race that a Movistar is helping, but on the other end, maybe they would have been better off if they were in that group ahead in the first place.
Yeah, and I guess Lipid's on for a good result, but yeah, it's SD Works kind of get bailed out a little bit. It's kind of sometimes people chase for UAE or Jumbo when they shouldn't in classics and the men's races, and SD Works get bailed out a little bit, although Reusser was strong. I forgot. Imagine if Reusser was in the chase group for Kopecky and Paris-Roubaix. Could have been a completely different race if she made it. Anyway, the gap is 47 seconds. It's coming down. Then that we see from a front-on shot on a short descent before the Sharav climb. We've got 2 climbs, Sharav and then Murderwi in the space of 7Ks. we see in the front on shot the peloton, a lot of dominoing on the front. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? Has there been a crash? There wasn't.
Yeah.
And then maybe the flow-on effect of that at the back is there is a crash with Ludwig going down. She bounces back up to Lee style.
Yeah,
and
crazy.
Her rear derailleur, though, is just completely off the bike. So that's her out of the race.
Exactly. And this time around, Cavalli's still in the group because Cavalli actually came back to that group. We see that at the Italian Buns. I was like, where's Cavalli? Where's Cavalli? Will we finally see Cavalli again? But I'm afraid she wasn't overly decisive from this point onwards. But you're right. That crash happened with Uttrup Ludwig. And at this point, Movistar's still pacing in that peloton group, whatever's left of the peloton after that crash. And the gap to Spratt has gone down to 20 seconds. That other group has been caught. And then we get to the Côte de Giraffe. And I'm like, what's going to happen? Vollering still has teammates here. Nick Fisher-Black is still in this group. So whoever rolls attacks on this group, the Vollering squad should be able to somewhat handle it. But then again, if a big rider goes, they might not be able to. But we get the opposite, right? We get Demi Vollering pacing.
It's where the race goes from everything we've talked about up to this point, kind of makes sense.
Yep.
And this is where the race just goes completely to, I have no idea the rationale for what a lot of these riders are doing. Why Vollering is superior to everyone here, we think. And she probably knows. And you'd have to know or think that for what she does next. So why would you isolate yourself when you have Bredevold and Fisher-Black and whoever on the Côte de Giraffe, where you have a descent afterwards, 2-3 Ks of flat, and then the run into the Murder-Wee, which is only a K to go. And she just hard paces, doesn't attack, hard paces Côte de Giraffe, 1.5K, 7%, catches Spratt in the process with all the other top favorites on her wheel. And importantly, ELB is put on a gap. Van Vleuten is put on a gap. If you're put on a gap on the Côte de Giraffe before the Murder-Wee, when Vollering's not even attacking, you ain't winning this race. No chance. So that's important for what happens next. Why Vollering did that, I have absolutely no idea. It makes no sense to me.
She isolates herself.
She did, yeah.
Completely. She has no domestiques left, and she puts herself in a position where she can get rolled attack upon. If, for example, there's teams in that group that now have multiple riders, these teams should 100% roll attacks on Vollering from this point onwards. We're now 6.5 kilometers from the finish line. There's a 4K section now with a bit of a descent, but not the descent where you can't attack. Where this is a descent where you can attack, in my opinion. Yeah. And then a flat portion as well before we get to the Murder-Wee, where you once again still can roll attacks.
Furniture.
Exactly. And, well, simply, let me go through this group for a second once again. You just said it, but we've got Demi Vollering pacing, Nivea Doma's in this group. Most importantly, Lippert and Annemiek van Vleuten on the same team. And next to that, Gaia Raelini, and also Elisa Longoborghini from the same team. And the other riders are riders with only one rider per team. So
no, and Shabby for Canyon.
Oh, Shabby, you're right. Shabby and Nivea Doma also both in this group as well. So that's 3 teams with 2 riders who can roll attacks on Vollering. And let's be honest about it. No one does a thing.
Canyon tried once by accident. That Shabby was on the other side of the road, realized no one was on her wheel. Vollering's literally stopped pacing. It's a false flat descent where it's a good place if you're carrying momentum from behind to attack. Shabby goes on the other side of the road, and then Vollering closed it down. And I'm like, AVV's just got dropped on Côte de Giraffe. Lippert's really good on this finish. Van Vleuten is not winning this race. In fact, her best chance to win this race herself is to go now.
Yep.
I'm waiting. Nothing. Sits in the group. I'm looking at Trek. Riolini cannot be the one to attack. She weighs 40 kilos. If she, Vollering will close it in 5 pedal strokes. And she's probably their best climber for the finish. ELB was put on a gap on Côte de Giraffe. She's the bigger engine. ELB has to be the one to sacrifice herself on the flat to force Vollering to close herself as long as possible on the flat, going full gas before the Murder-Wee with Riolini in the wheels. Van Vleuten the same with Lippert in the wheels, because if Vollering can basically freewheel to the base of the Murder-Wee, then what happened on Côte de Giraffe will just be exacerbated on the steeper gradients. And I don't know whether it was because I saw people on the radio, and I don't know what the DSs are saying. To be honest, you don't really need, frankly, a
Agreed.
DS to tell you in this situation. It's very obvious. Like, SD works isolated, you have teammates, roll them.
Yeah.
And who should roll them? The bigger rider who's less likely to win on the final climb. So Van Vleuten, I don't know whether it was selfishness. Because listen, if Van Vleuten loses 50 seconds on his final climb, I can't be as strict in the criticism, because she might literally have couldn't do anything. But she didn't. She had something left in the tank. And she didn't. And so her and Lippert, there's just no chemistry, sacrifice for the other, particularly on Van Vleuten's end. And I think if it didn't come from the car, then it's just selfishness.
It's so weird, because when you see the situation, I fully agree with you. It's not just the DS. Like, people might have the instant response of it's the DS's fault. I also agree that the DS should say one of you needs to attack, and it needs to be Van Vleuten, because Lippert has the best chance on the final climb. Needs to happen 100%. In case there's no signal or something, let's pretend that there's no signal, because my 4G stops working sometimes in Wallonia as well. Well, then
beef.
That's not a roast. It's true.
Do you have a different SIM card? Do you have to turn roaming on when you go to Wallonia?
I've got roaming turned on anyway, but just in case. But so basically, the DSs, even if that signal doesn't come from the DS, as a rider, you should know that. Like, you're in this group. Now, the other factor that you could ask is, are they completely empty? That's the one you mentioned as well. And I also agree with you. They're not completely empty at this point, in my opinion. Also because Vollering set up in that descent. Maybe a Lamborghini seemed more empty than a Van Vleuten, based on the result on the final climb. That's in hindsight. But I can also imagine that the factor that Vollering sits up in the descent, the tempo goes down so significantly that the group behind comes back. There must be some recovery there, right?
She could have tried to attack, because she's still trying on the base of Motorwee. And when Van Anrooy comes back, Group 2 comes back, which was miles behind. Group 2 comes back. Van Anrooy, I was like, oh, she's going to go over the top. You know when Wout brought Roglic back on the Grenon descent, and the speed difference is so much? I thought Van Anrooy was going to go over the top. And she just goes to the front, starts pacing, not with Riolini in the wheel. Riolini's like moving herself up on the right-hand side. So Trek disaster class, Movistar disaster class, and when they got to the base of the Motorwee, everyone's 6 wide, because the pace had been, no one's really taken it upon themselves. There's no SD Works rider to position Vollering. I was like, I hope Vollering wins, even though her Shrev move a little bit perplexing to me, but maybe she knew they wouldn't try roll her. And predictably, Benji, it happens. She goes to the front, Van der Breggen style, literally looks at probably her power and just does the fastest Motorwee she can possibly do. Lippert starts on a gap, which is crucial here. She starts the climb on a gap.
How did it happen at the start of Motorwee? Like, was it positioning wise? Because Niewiadoma went to the front, and a rider from Canyon in her wheel drops the gap, but Vollering's with Niewiadoma, and those two just ride off for a bit. Like, how does that happen? If you're Lippert, how can you let that happen?
Because I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But basically, Vollering, gets this gap given to her. She also, like, Riolini probably doesn't have the initial surge to close it. She's in a group now. There's a group with Van Vleuten, Riolini, Lippert, Mavi Garcia chasing. Lippert looks the strongest. She's chasing herself. On the steep section, Vollering drops Niewiadoma off the wheel, who's gone over her limit. But Lippert's coming back, like on the climb, at a decent speed, but she's having to close such a big gap herself on the steeper section. So she's doing so many watts above her threshold, gets to Vollering's wheel, and I was like, ooh, we might have a race anyways. Doesn't happen. Vollering goes again, paced it perfectly, entered in good position, drops Lippert off the wheel, and goes clear to win by 5 seconds ahead of Lippert on Motorwee. Riolini paced it well, 7 seconds behind in third. Huge result for her. Mavi Garcia fourth. Muzic fifth, who we didn't see much of. Mulman sixth. Van Vleuten seventh, all on 10 seconds. Then Persico, Shabby, and Castelline 10th. I don't know if Castelline was in the Group 1 after Shareva, whether she came back in Group 2.
Group 2.
Elisa Longa Borghini finishes on 44 seconds, and Nuvia Doma finishes 11th. So her and Shabby finished 9th and 11th. Elisa Longa Borghini finished on 44 seconds. So, yeah, listen, all tactics discussion aside, Vollering is by far the best here.
Yeah.
That's why the tactics discussion had to happen, because she's so much better that you just cannot have a realistic expectation of winning if you go to the base with her and she hasn't had to chase down 5 attacks.
And like the instant response then is like of people like, oh, but Vollering was the strongest, she would have won anyway. Or at Amstel, Pogacar was the strongest, so he would have won anyway, regardless of what other teams tried. But you want to optimize your chances to win, no? So you might as well get the best strategy out of your pocket that you can instead of just gifting it to a Vollering, because I feel like in the last 6 kilometers, they basically told Vollering, well, you can have it.
Well, the difference between Poggy and Amstel, to be honest, I don't know how the fuck you beat him there.
Yeah, like
I agree,
Ineos
but didn't help.
Give him more of a competition.
Yeah. But here, the difference between Lippert and Vollering, it's not 20%.
Yeah.
Lippert had to close this huge gap herself. And if listen, would it have been different if for 4Ks, Vollering has to chase Annemiek van Vleuten on the flat, full gas, the whole time, doing her threshold before Murderwee with Lippert in the wheel?
Probably.
And then Lippert enters. Would it have been closer? Could it have been different? I think so.
Yeah.
It's definitely not going to have hurt Lippert's chances, but I mean, Vollering put herself in a sticky situation. No one took advantage of it, and she wins her second of the Ardennes triple with Liège coming up this weekend. Should she attack early in Liège? She probably will. I don't know when she'll go, but yeah, clinic from her. Is there anything else from this race, Benji? I guess I think the teams need to be realistic at Liège. Like, Vollering is a cut above right now, and if you go to Rochefoucauld, no, what's the last one? Redoute?
Yeah,
you go to Redoute?
The last one.
Okay, you go to the last one with Vollering, she's gonna cook you if she's fresh. So devise something around that.
Yeah, certainly, and I am looking forward to LBL. But we first got the men's Flèche coming also this afternoon, and in all honesty, I kind of hope that a Pogacar goes early in the same way that Van Vleuten does. But in reality, I don't think he will necessarily need to.
Doesn't matter. Can't win.
You're gonna keep it up, and if he crosses the line first, what will you do?
Well, I'll say he's a $1.50 favorite anyway. So anyone predicting that he was winning, it's the obvious pick. So I'm wrong. I'm still right. Not really. But yeah. Anyway, Fleche Wallone, credit to Vollering for making it a little bit interesting. But yeah, just food for thought. I think Mollman looked good, entered in bad position. Riolini. Can Riolini doing anything in Liège, Benji? She already won a one-day race, a 1-1 Italian race with Sprat. She came third here, second on her feet, should have been given the win. Is Liège better or worse for her than Flèche? I think Flèche is actually better for her with just a steep, nasty finish.
I think so as well. Partially because I think the team will already just decide that she's not all-out leader for LBL in the first place. But that being said, I agree that the parkour would fit better for Flèche, knowing that it's like a steep watt per kilo test at the end. That being said, there's more flat in Fleche Wallone, but it's also not ridden at the same pace than the flat in between the climbs on LBL. Like the first 75% of Flèche is not at threshold, for it to say, Well,
yeah.
in LBL it's gonna be really tough. What I would like to see is maybe Riolini anticipate in the same way that a Dignan did when she won, for example. That kind of scenario I would like seeing. Is Kopecky riding it, by the way? Because I feel like I would like to see Kopecky go early as well in the same way that Dignan did. Or do you feel like Kopecky could win it regardless if she stays with the favorite group as well? Not on her program.
Not on her program. She probably doesn't want to ride for Vollering again. She's only done 7 race days. But I mean,
Pretty good ones though.
yeah, she's done pretty well. 3 wins in those. Should have won Roubaix. So Vollering for TDFF looking good. She's probably the favourite right now, given her AVV shape. That's probably the other big takeaway from the Ardennes so far. Obviously, it's a long time until July. Shape can change, and the women's race starts the end of July. So we have 3 full months and a bit. But Vollering, to be honest, is looking better than AVV. So that at least is good news for competitiveness in on the Tourmalet in the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift later on. Anything else, Benji?
Not really. Looking forward to it very much.
Watch Tour of the Alps now, then Fleche Wallone men, jam-packed schedule today. Until the recap of Fleche Wallone men later this afternoon. Ciao.